Hello, everybody. We're going to take just a couple minutes to let people join us in the room, and then we will start the meeting. Thank you to everybody who showed up early and on time. We're going to wait about 2 or 3 minutes for people to join us, and then we'll get started. So everybody hang tight. Thanks. If you do have questions for the Office of Management and Budget, you're able to send them to us by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom of your window. And that'll be an opportunity for you to provide just any feedback about the budget itself, or if you have questions about the activity as we're doing it. Hey, everybody, we're going to wait about 1 more minute and then we will get started. Thanks for being here. All right, everybody, thanks for being here. We're going to start this meeting, and I'm going to let Katie Johnston take it away. Katie?
Thank you, Kenny. Happy to be here tonight. I'd actually like to start tonight's meeting by introducing Elizabeth Pauley, the city's city manager, to give us a quick introduction.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Kenny. And thank all of you for being here tonight. Really, I'm impressed and grateful that you're taking the time to join us tonight for this budget exercise and for your interest in the City of Tacoma's budget. So just a little bit of background, the city builds a budget every 2 years. We call it a biennial budget. And our budget reflects both where we receive resources and how we project to spend those resources to achieve our community's goals and provide key services. We are required by law to provide a balanced budget. We're faced this biennium with the impacts of the current COVID emergency, which means declining revenues, as well as increased need for essential services. We're also focused on ensuring that our budget advances equity and anti-racism efforts that our City Council and our community are demanding of us. So tonight, I hope that you find this to be an interactive and informative process for learning about our general fund budget, how the budget works, and some of the challenging decisions that we have. And I just want to let you know that I personally look forward to seeing you, how you approach balancing the city's budget and how you reflect your priorities through that effort. And again, look forward to your collective approach. Thank you again for your time and interest. I appreciate you coming to tonight's online forum, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you again for your introduction tonight, and welcome to everyone. My name is Katie Johnston. I'm the budget officer for the City of Tacoma, and we truly value your public input into our budgeting process. Currently, we're receiving feedback in two forms. One is to better understand our community's priorities, and the second is to understand how does our budget reflect those priorities and ultimately how to balance it. You can visit our budget website, budget.cityoftacoma.org, for more information on our outreach processes, including 6 current surveys on the city's priority for 2020 through 2022. Tonight, we'll focus on how our general fund budget reflects those priorities and talk about the current COVID emergency. While we'll not be focused on the entire city budget, we'll primarily be focused on the city's most visible and flexible fund, the city's general fund. This is where we receive your property tax and sales tax revenues, and it supports the majority of services related to areas like community safety, homelessness, libraries, and other key services. If you have questions tonight or thoughts during the workshop, please feel free to use the Q&A function that Kenny mentioned earlier. Since we want to hear from you and we want to spend most of our time in kind of our workshop format, we may not be able to respond to all of your questions during tonight's session. I'll start just by then going over a little bit of our agenda for this evening. So tonight we'll start with a review of the city's strategic priorities, a commitment to anti-racism, how we structure the budget, and especially the COVID emergency impacts, and then we'll spend the majority of our time in our Balancing Act workshop. First, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what makes a good budget. So when we talk about how to approach our budgeting process, we look at both our community's goals and best practices. And therefore, we lead with these, the principles that you see here. So first, a good budget leads with equity and anti-racism to ensure that we're fully including and responding to the impacts of our services from an anti-racist view. The budget is aligned with the city's goals, including our long-range plan, Tacoma 2025. We'll talk about that tonight in terms of our city's priorities, which are based on our community survey, Tacoma 2025, and our city council's direction. A budget is also a great budget if it aligns out with results and outcomes. So what can we say about what's expected in terms of results from the services we provide and the resources that we've funded? To do this, we look at it intentionally at the impacts of all of the city's programs and through the city's performance management system. And one of the things that you can look at if you're interested in how we report on results, you can find out more information at our city's Results 253 website that has updated information on our city's goals. Our budget will also incorporate a long-term perspective and promote fiscally responsible actions. And the way that we do that is through a 6-year revenue and expense forecast, reserve management, and engaging our staff in continuous reviews of their budget. And then finally, a good budget includes our community. It involves and promotes effective communication, which is accomplished through our community survey, early and consistent communication with our city council, online surveys and tools, and outreach events like tonight. I'll turn it over to Jacques Colon, our strategic planning manager, to review the city's strategic priorities and commitment to anti-racism.
Thanks, Katie. As Katie mentioned, Tacoma 2025 is the city's strategic plan, and it was developed by thousands of community members. And this year, one of the roles that I took with other staff was to help the city council identify what their priorities were within Tacoma 2025. And what you see in front of you is a synopsis or a summary of what City Council said their priorities were for the coming biennium. So you can see at the top, just like Katie mentioned, the anti-racism and equity is something that the City Council is demanding of us and that the community is demanding of us. And that trickles down into all 6 of the other priority areas. So those 6 areas are what you're going to be hearing again and again tonight as the framing for our budget process. So these 6 priorities are the priority areas that you, again, will see in the budget process. So I'll just quickly name what they are. Health and improving health outcomes, reducing health inequities for all Tacoma residents. Housing, decreasing the percentage of people who are spending more than 45% of their income on housing and transportation costs. Improving access by improving access and proximity for all Tacoma residents, no matter how much money they make or their race or ethnicity, to community facilities, services, infrastructure, and employment. Community safety, which means that we want to make sure that we're increasing the positive perception of safety and overall quality of life. Translation, that people feel safe here. And then livable wage jobs means that we want to make sure that we're increasing the number of Tacoma households that have livable wage jobs within proximity to the city. So people have access to jobs, they're livable wage jobs, and they're in or close to Tacoma. And then finally, increasing the percentage of residents who believe they're able to have a positive impact on the community and express trust in the public institutions in Tacoma. So those are the council priorities that we're going to be talking through today. And I just want to quickly mention that the council developed these priorities over several months. And once things really changed after COVID-19, went back to these priorities and reestablished that these in fact were the areas as we think about recovering from the impacts of the pandemic and also thinking about being a resilient community moving forward that we wanted to focus on and reflect that in our budget. So moving on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about what this commitment to anti-racism really looks like. If you're interested in more information, I would point you to Resolution 40622. And that resolution really talks about the City Council's dedication and commitment to transforming the institutions, systems, policies, practices, and contracts impacted by systemic racism, with initial priority given to policing. In addition, this is also a resolution that establishes new practices centering the voices of those most impacted by systemic racism. Now, what this means in practice, as it relates to our conversation tonight, is that this really needs to be reflected as a priority in the budget and the recovery process. So Elizabeth, our city manager, talked about the City Council demanding this be a priority for us. And part of that means keeping anti-racism as a top priority in this process of budget development. It also means, looking at that next column, that the budget isn't the only way that we need to make anti-racism real. It also needs to be part of how we evaluate and transform our services, both new policies and programs, as well as making sure that we're looking at transforming our existing services. And then finally, it also needs to be reflected in how we build a legislative platform, making sure that local, state, and federal level policies are looking to transform institutions impacted by systemic racism. So with that, I want to pass it back to Reed Benyon, who is going to take us into the actual activity that we're going to be jumping into tonight, which is called Balancing Act.
So before Reed hops into our Balancing Act activity, I'm actually going to give just a quick overview of what the general fund is. One of the common questions that we get as an entity is where do we spend our funding, and many of the sources that we have regarding rates and things like that, because the city actually has a couple of different enterprises. So I just wanted to quickly go over how the city's budget is structured. So what we are looking at right now is our budget for 2019 and 2020. So on the whole, the city has a $3.5 billion budget. You'll notice that the majority of that budget is made up by Tacoma Public Utilities, environmental services, and other enterprise funds. So Tacoma Public Utilities is our power and water utility. They also operate a rail service in Tacoma, and environmental services is solid waste services, surface water, and wastewater. And so when we charge rates to our community and when you pay your power bill or your water bill, those bills go directly to support the cost of providing power services and water services. So those revenues are dedicated back to specifically providing those service areas. Additionally, we have some enterprise funds like our Tacoma Dome, our Tacoma Convention Center, and our permitting fund that are also essentially where we charge a cost for the service, and then we use that money to fund directly that service and the provision of it. And that represents about 54% of our budget. The next largest area of our city's budget, 24%, is our trust and special revenue funds. This represents how much the funding that we spend on pension benefits for retired employees, our trust funds like our healthcare and dental costs internally, as well as special revenue funds. Special revenue funds reflect things like voter passed initiatives for Tacoma Creates or Tacoma Streets Initiative, where we have specific taxes that you are providing to the city and that we spend, and we separate out those expenses into special funds so that we can make sure that those revenues are dedicated for specific areas and cannot be spent on other services. We also have internal services that we provide within the city, like our HR services and IT services, and our debt and capital funds. That means that we have the remaining general fund budget, which is about 15% of our total budget. This tends to be where we have a lot of community interest and discussion. The general fund represents the general taxes you pay in terms of the city's general property tax or sales tax, business taxes, and utility taxes. And so those funds go into the city's general fund and are spent on a wide variety of services, including our police department, our fire department, neighborhood and community services, libraries, our courts, municipal courts, as well as many other service areas that Reed will detail in our activity. I want to just quickly note that the City of Tacoma is a distinct entity from Tacoma Public Schools. So Tacoma Public Schools raises their own funds in our community. And while we partner sometimes on individual programs, you will not see their funding reflected in this budget. Same with Metro Parks as a separate entity. And while we partner on some services and provide a small amount of funding to Metro Parks that Reed will show today, they are separate from the City of Tacoma, along with the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department is actually a separate entity. We do participate in funding them, but they are separate from the City of Tacoma. So you'll see a little bit of funding for them today. I really quickly want to just talk about how COVID has impacted the cities of Tacoma's budget. So when we look at the city's general fund, because we receive revenues from places like sales taxes and business taxes, they do shift with the economy. And given the economic impacts that we're seeing right now through COVID, we are projecting our revenues to decline. And the challenge that poses is that means our revenues are declining exactly when we know our community needs more services. There's a lot of uncertainty about the economy, and so we will be continuing to adjust these revenue projections and be iterative over changes in our economy. And ultimately, the revenues are highly dependent on what happens with our phases of reopening, how impactful stimulus efforts are, and ultimately whether or not we enter a prolonged recession. So we'll just be carefully tracking those revenues, but ultimately that's the situation that we kind of find ourselves in, that we want to ask for the community's feedback today. So when we enter into the exercise that Reed's going to lead us to, you'll notice that we have a gap in the general fund, and that's shown here. That's a result from seeing those economic impacts on our revenues. And additionally, we know that your demand for services and places you'd like to see us prioritize our resources might also be changing due to the COVID emergency response. So I'll turn it over to Reed Benyon, who's a lead analyst in the Office of Management and Budget, to walk you through our Balancing Act workshop.
Thank you, Katie. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Katie said, my name's Reed Benyon. And over the next 40 or so minutes, I'll be walking you through our balancing act exercise. I think Kenny will be dropping the link into the chat where everyone can get it. So this tool lets you see our projected general fund deficit for the 21-22 budget. Your goal in the exercise is to balance the budget. Sorry, I've lost my place already. Your goal in this exercise is to close the budget deficit by adjusting spending or revenues. And with this tool, we hope you get a better understanding of where our community desires services, and we hope to get a better understanding of where you all expect services to be provided in the future. We also hope that you come away from this exercise with a better understanding of the service the city offers and insight of what services other Tacoma residents value. As you go through the tool, I'll be providing some information on the services provided in each of our categories that we have listed, so you can better understand the funding and what funding and defunding these various services will have on service delivery. I will be focusing us on the spending categories, as they are the areas that we have the most control over. However, know that the revenues are also there for manipulation. I'm going to start by showing a quick 90-second video on the Balancing Act tool just to get us oriented. I'd like to also mention that the tool is not compatible with Internet Explorer, so you'll have to be using Google Chrome or Firefox or Safari or something like that. So let me share that video real quick.
Using your phone, tablet, or laptop to interact with Balancing Act budget simulation is easy. To get started, go to the participant URL provided to you by the meeting organizer and click Get Started. You'll see spending and revenue budget items that you can interact with. Click one to open it. The blue info icons provide additional information and context. On some questions, you can click the plus or minus buttons to change the amount. On others, you simply select your choice. Once you have made your selection, click Submit Category. Do this for each item until each has a green check mark. Be sure to check both spending and revenue sides. When you are done with all the items, click Submit Budget. Your results will be combined with everyone else's and displayed on the facilitator screen.
Yeah.
This is a.
Is it not working?
It's not showing your the screen, it's showing your desktop.
Cool. Neat. Let me start that over. Can you see it now?
No.
Now. Still
Yes.
no.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for your patience. Can you hear it?
Using your phone, tablet, or laptop to interact with Balancing Act budget simulation is easy. To get started, go to the participant URL provided to you by the meeting organizer and click Get Started. You'll see spending and revenue budget items that you can interact with. Click one to open it. The blue info icons provide additional information and context. On some questions, you can click the plus or minus buttons to change the amount. On others, you simply select your choice. Once you have made your selection, click Submit Category. Do this for each item until each has a green check mark. Be sure to check both spending and revenue sides. When you are done with all the items, click Submit Budget. Your results will be combined with everyone else's and displayed on the facilitator screen. This is a great time for you to learn what others had to say, ask why they said it, and to give the meeting organizers a chance to provide additional information and context. If you decide you want to change your answers at any time, just make your new selection and click Submit Category again. Thanks again for using Balancing Act, the interactive way to learn about budgets and to provide informed input.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. We're all learning our new virtual meeting platforms on the fly. We should be more familiar formats into this, but here we are. So I just want to get everyone oriented real quick with the tool. I hope that was informative to you all. I'm going to now pull up the view of the tool so we could all see what we're dealing with.
Ease of setup,
So are you now
and
seeing
engaging
the
the
tool?
user so that they understand the tough challenges faced by
Replaying
policymakers.
the video.
We have worked with
Are you
some of the
serious?
most innovative, responsive local governments in the nation, including San
Okay.
Antonio, Fort Collins, Virginia Beach.
Get rid of that.
While Reed's getting that up real quick, I wanted to take a chance to answer 2 questions that I saw in the chat. So one had to do with why the city is even offering new tax revenue options while we could be prioritizing resources that we already have. And I want to say that is the exact question that we're asking you to give us feedback on. One of the things that we've done when we set up this tool is we wanted to be able to show you really the options that are available. So we do have some things like new revenue options, but if you as a resident would like to see us reprioritize our current expenses, please do that through tonight's activity. And that's the exact feedback that we look forward to receiving from you. Secondly, there was a question about how we asked our departments to address this deficit right now in our current budgeting exercises. I want to let you know that we've actually asked all of the city's departments. There have not been departments excluded from this. We've asked all departments to propose a 15% reduction to the city's general fund expenses and expenses in many of our other funds. And one of the things that we do is we ask all of our departments for those reductions so that we can see the impacts on services of reductions in different areas. And so that we can get feedback from our community about where you'd like to see reductions maybe be less severe or more severe or stay the same. And so today's activity will help us better get feedback from our community about how you'd like to see those reductions actually shown in the budget that the city manager will propose to our city council.
Okay. Third time's a charm. So I hope you all are seeing this screen now, the tool. I may have to jump around a little bit because I'll be shifting back and forth between the view that you have and the facilitators tool. So I just want to get everyone oriented here. This is the way the tool appears on a desktop. When you're working on a desktop, you see right here, the top is our projected deficit of $67.2 million for the 21-22 budget. On the right, you'll see our spending categories that are organized by the council priority areas, and I'll get into those a little bit more. Right here on the left, you have a donut chart showing where those dollars are spent, and then down below we have the revenues. If you're on a mobile device, it's a little bit different view. When you get in the tool, you'll just have the default view is of your spending, and then there's a toggle switch that lets you look at the revenues on the other side. There is no donut chart in a mobile device format. So we have organized spending according to the City Council's priorities that Jacques went over. Those categories are access to facilities and infrastructure, housing, jobs and economic recovery, community safety, health and social services, and community engagement. I'd like to walk you through those spending categories one by one to give you a little bit of information on what services are provided under each category. If you want to go at your own speed or fill it out in a different order, you are free to do so. I just want to help facilitate the discussion. So our first category here is our first spending category here is access to facilities and infrastructure. This priority is focused on increasing equitable digital access, infrastructure projects and improvements, access to transit, and opportunities for youth. If you click on this category like I did, it reveals more subcategories. The first subcategory is street maintenance. So this funding helps pay for the maintenance of things you see in the street, from the surface you drive on to the sidewalks you walk on, lane striping, traffic signals, street lights, all those kinds of amenities. This does not represent all of the dollars that are dedicated for this purpose. This only represents the general funds portion. Funding also comes from other sources like the Tacoma Streets Initiative, other dedicated revenues like the gas tax, as well as state and federal grants. So if you click, as you saw in the tutorial, you could click on the plus or minus button to adjust funding in this area. The increments are plus or minus 5%. You could also add comments by clicking on this little comment area here. And we will get those comments, although we won't be able to see them in real time. The next category is facility maintenance and upgrades and real property services.
Sorry to jump in real quick, but the benefit to folks staying in this particular priority area before jumping ahead is that we'll get to see the results in real time together. So as Reed is going through access to facilities and infrastructure, if you are able to stay in this priority area and make your choices as he's going through them, we'll actually be able to see those results in real time and talk through what everybody on this particular call is proposing in terms of reductions or additions.
Thanks, Chuck. So facilities maintenance and upgrades and real property services, the expenditures here go towards things like maintaining things like city buildings, fire stations, police stations, and the municipal complex, as well as senior centers. This kind of spending helps us keep facilities in good condition and operational for public use. Additionally, this category funds real property services, which manages the use of the right-of-way and all city-owned property. Our next category in this section is neighborhood libraries and library operations. The Tacoma Public Library owns and operates 8 libraries throughout the city. This funding goes towards those operations, including materials, both print and electronic, programming, and maintenance of those facilities. These services and facilities ensure access to information. In the other category, we have a number of things rolled in there. It includes things like long-range planning. This includes work to develop the comprehensive plan, along with neighborhood and sub-area plans, and associated regulations and implementation strategies that guide future development of the built natural environment in Tacoma. It includes arts, which funds Tacoma Arts Month and public art installations. Special events, this program serves as a liaison between community leaders and private constituents wishing to hold events in the community. It also special events also runs the City Events and Recognitions Committee with membership representing all city districts. Parks maintenance is also in this other category. There are 19 parks that the city of Tacoma maintains and are actually outside of metro parks. But this category also includes contributions that the city makes to metro parks for maintenance of their parks. It also includes digital equity programs, which ensure access to internet resources by the community. So when you're done adjusting spending in this area, click the submit category, and we will be able to see what everyone here thinks of this. I'm gonna give you all a few minutes to do that, and I'll ask Katie if there's anything that come up she'd like to answer.
We'll take a chance when we pause on these sections just to answer any questions that you're posing at that time. So one that I saw was whether or not the city has a large budget shortfall, like how is this budget shortfall different than past budget shortfalls? And so the main difference right now is just the severity of the budget shortfall in 2020. The comparison to past recessions is that between kind of the best year of the last recession and the worst year, it took over 2 years to see our unemployment fall, our sales taxes then be impacted, and our business taxes decrease over that period of time. Unfortunately, due to the COVID emergency, since we had to shut down so many of our businesses so quickly in our community, we saw the economic impacts over the course of about 2 months when we had the March to kind of April period. And we're still climbing our way out of those economic impacts. And some of the risk that we have now is the unfortunate impacts of unemployment on our community, and knowing how many jobs will come back in the next year or 2 years. So just a little insights onto how we're projecting our budget and things currently going on in the economy. I am going to then turn it over to Jacques, who's going to give us a little wrap up for this section and talk about some of what we heard from our community.
Thanks, Katie. And there was one question that I wanted to speak to that I saw in the Q&A box around what definition is the city using for anti-racist? And just really quickly to go down that rabbit hole, equality is something that you hear when you talk about giving everybody the same service. We know that people need different things, so equality is not enough. So you've probably heard equity a lot. Equity is something that we talk about when we say that in order to achieve equity, everybody needs to have the opportunities that they need to reach their full potential, recognizing that different people need different things. Anti-racism is to take it even a step further and to say that equity isn't enough, because we know that opportunities are built on historic and systemic investments and divestments. So for example, looking at this particular priority area of access to facilities and infrastructures, which neighborhoods have gotten investments over the course of the city's history has been impacted by race. And that's the reality. And so in order to do anti-racist work, you have to acknowledge the impacts of race and systemic racism on the outcomes that we're seeing, and then actively take steps to undo those systems. So that's what I would say for now. But there's much more to unpack there, and we're happy to have that discussion with others that want to leave comments or find ways to talk to us about it. So, yes, Katie.
I was just going to say that one of the other questions we received is how are we advancing and prioritizing anti-racism in our work, given where our public can see that we spend our current dollars. And I would say to Jacques' point, there's a lot of historical inequities in our community. And one of the things that we're asking our community is how would we reprioritize our resources to meet the intention behind the anti-racism goal that Jacques just mentioned. And so I would just say, give us feedback around that from your perspective and experiences in our community. And I also saw one technical question kind of about this section I wanted to address. There was a question of whether or not community centers are included in this category. So under the other area, we do have the city partners with Metro Parks to support People's Center on the Hilltop. Otherwise, the other community centers are actually managed by Metro Parks and not included in this budget. So thank you, Jacques. I'll turn it back over to you.
Absolutely. So it looks like we have 25 or so people that have submitted their proposals in this category. And what it's looking like so far is that we actually have a little bit more money being invested into street maintenance. We have a little bit more money being invested into facility maintenance and upgrades. And it looks like there is a significant investment that folks want to see in neighborhood libraries and operations. I think that's somewhere in the range of just under 10% that folks are looking to add there. And then in the other category, similarly, we see a little bit of investment. So overall, it looks like more people are choosing to add a little bit of resources into this priority area. Some people are proposing to make some cuts, but overall, it looks like this is an area that most of the people that submitted want to see a little bit more investment too. Reed, how does that vibe with what we've seen so far from the community survey results?
So this survey has been up for a number of weeks now, and we've gotten about 400 submissions thus far. And it's actually, this is a little bit different than what we've seen from our general survey responses. Overall, people have reduced spending in this area by about 7%. Primarily that coming in that area of other, which I could understand. When you just see an other category, it kind of doesn't really explain what that is. So I think maybe with a little bit of context, people understand those services that are provided in that category.
That's good
So
to know. Thanks, Reed.
I'm going to move on.
Yeah, ready to join the housing priority?
Yeah. So within housing, you're going to see as people adjust these areas change. But this priority is focused on increasing housing units, helping households afford existing housing, and increasing housing units serving people who often experience barriers to housing. The first subcategory you see listed there is affordable housing. Within the general fund, the city currently dedicates approximately $700,000 towards the affordable housing. Funding goes towards preserving and supporting affordable housing in the community. We oftentimes do this by partnering with others in the community, such as developers and property owners and housing service providers. Outside the general fund, there are other programs that support new units and rehabilitation of affordable housing. And to make, there's also services to make housing more affordable to residents. A specific example is over in Tacoma Public Utilities, where they have programs to help low-income customers. Further down, the next category is a little bit different. There's a affordable housing dedicated taxes section. And in this category, you are able to indicate if you are willing to support an increase in local taxes to support affordable housing. There are 3 options included. You can increase the Affordable Housing Trust Fund by $10, $30, or $40 million. The Housing Trust Fund money goes to create, preserve, and support affordable housing through sales tax and property taxes. If you do increase this area, it doesn't go to decrease the overall budget deficit, as these funds would be dedicated funds outside of the general fund, dedicated for affordable housing purposes. The next category is homeless housing services. So spending here includes supportive services for individuals and families at risk or currently experiencing homelessness. Programs include case management and mental health treatment, legal services, food banks, meals, furniture banks, and temporary financial assistance. These services help ensure access to safe shelter and housing. The next section listed in this category is the multifamily property tax exemption. So funding here goes to fund staff time and analysis and management of our multifamily property tax exemption program, which is a tool used by the city to help attract the development of multifamily housing. The next section listed is the landlord tenant program. So this is a program that provides services to landlords and tenants, including educating on laws and regulations. The funding goes towards enforcement of the Tacoma's rental housing code. The rental housing code governs the rules landlords and tenants must operate, including notice requirements for rent increases, notice to vacate, retaliations, and relocation assistance. And then finally, in this category, there is the human rights support. This program performs investigations on complaints of discrimination in accordance with the Fair Housing Act. This program investigates discrimination complaints in the area of employment, public accommodations, and credit and insurance. So again, I'll give you a few minutes to manipulate the funding in this area. And I'll ask Katie if there's anything else that has come up in the last 2 minutes.
So one of the questions that I saw is, why do we show dedicated taxes only for affordable housing when you look at taxing options? And so I'm not encouraging anyone to skip ahead, but we will talk about some of the city's taxing authority when we get to kind of the revenues after we go through all of the expenses. But since you see affordable housing taxes here, I just wanted to provide a little bit of information. So for the most part, local governments like cities in Washington have to obtain authority to impose taxes from the state. So what that means is they actually provide rules around what type of taxes we can impose on our community. And so the state has given local governments the ability to implement dedicated taxes. And so we've implemented quite a few of those in our community. So examples of that are Tacoma Creates, which is the authority given by the state to fund cultural institutions and cultural programming. Things like our Streets Initiative is authority from the state given to impose a sales tax specifically related to supporting streets, or the mental health and chemical dependency tax that is a specific authority that we're given to impose a tax related to serving mental health and substance use disorder and related services. And so the affordable housing option is actually one of the few dedicated taxes that's really left open to the city for a public vote. And so given that, that's one of the reasons why you see it listed here as an option for a dedicated tax. When we get into the kind of revenue section, we'll talk about some general taxes that we also still have the authority to impose or increase. But I hope that's kind of a helpful overview of why you see affordable housing specifically called out here. So just wanted to, and I see a lot of questions about how we choose to prioritize our resources amongst areas like housing or community safety. And I encourage you to vote with your feet. And so that's exactly what we want to see in how you're submitting your information to us. So please feel free to use this tool as an opportunity to show where you would like to see resources increased and where you think actually the city should decrease funding to help offset or fund those other service areas. And then
so I'm gonna jump in.
John.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in. It looks like we have about 25 people that have submitted again for housing. So I'll just encourage folks again to click that submit button until you see the green check, and then flip back between your browser and the Zoom webinar so that you can see the results together as I'm describing them on the Zoom. So it looks like almost everybody that submitted in this category submitted to increase our investment into affordable housing significantly. So the same can be said about the affordable housing dedicated taxes, and it looks like we have fairly even split between people that wanted to increase the Housing Trust Fund by 30 million, those that wanted to increase it by 40 million, and those that did not want to increase it at all. And then for homeless housing services, it looks like folks wanted to see a significant amount of investment happening above where it was currently slated in that area. And much smaller degree, but also some increases asked for in the multifamily property tax exemption. And then for the landlord tenant program, definitely most of the people that submitted any change submitted for an increase in investment there. And for human rights support, we see similarly 25 people submitted an increase proposal. So it looks like, again, housing was a priority area that folks wanted to see more investment in. Reed, I'll ask again, does that match up with what we're seeing from the survey?
Yeah, so from what we've seen thus far, that actually is pretty much right in line with the surveys that we received up until today. On average, people have increased funding in this overall category by about 150%. So it's definitely an area that people want to see more resources, well, at least from the surveys we received.
Thanks, Reed. So it looks like our next category is jobs and economic recovery.
Yeah, so this priority area is focused on increasing the number of livable wage jobs, decreasing income inequality, increasing the number of Tacomas participating in industry-specific education programs, and increasing regional economic development collaboration. The first subcategory in this area is business services, workforce partnerships, and economic development. This includes programs for business attraction, retention, and expansion, includes farmers markets, neighborhood business district revitalization, workforce education and training. The core function of this program is to provide assistance to existing businesses that will enable them to their sustainability and growth, and to recruit new businesses to the city. Tax and licensing section. This includes all operations of the city's tax and licensing division, including working with businesses to obtain and remain in compliance with licenses, collect business taxes, and maintaining the business license and rental housing codes. So there's just those two categories in this area. I'll just give you another couple minutes to submit what you think the appropriate funding level should be in this area. Remember to click the submit category button at the bottom, and we'll go over some of those results in a second. Katie, was there anything that is coming through the chat?
I think given that this one's a pretty small section, I'm not seeing a lot of questions.
Okay.
I will just respond. A member asked about how they can help get people involved in the budgeting process and with other governmental processes. I would say please help share these tools. So our balancing act tool and our surveys that are also translated into 3 other languages. And then please contact myself. I'm happy to talk to you or Kenny, our engagement, community engagement liaison. And I think we would love to find out ways that we can better engage with our community around these areas.
So again, if you can just make sure that you hit that submit button so that we can get the tabulation, and it looks like a bunch of people just hit submit right as I said that. So like Katie said, this particular piece of the pie does not represent a huge chunk, so we're gonna move through this fairly quickly. But increases to business service, workforce, partnership, and economic development in the range of adding 2.6 million to the already existing 6.6 million investment. Looks like we're seeing a slight decrease in funding for tax and licensing from their current 9.4 million threshold, but that looks like it's very, very minor in terms of how much people are asking to take out of that bucket. And I think that's it that we have for this category, yeah?
Yep, and actually that's really close to what people have been saying in our other surveys that have been filled out. On average, people have increased funding in this area by about 1%. So
that's going to take us to where we see the bulk of our general fund spending.
Yeah, so this is a big category, obviously, of general fund spending. Overall, all the services in this category currently represent almost 70% of general fund spending. So there's a lot here. So bear with me as I go through some of these service areas. So community safety is a priority focused on improving perceptions of safety and neighborhood quality of life and reducing crime. So the first subcategory up here is fire suppression and readiness. Spending in this area goes towards the operations of 15 fire stations and their response to fire emergencies in the city. About 85% of the cost in this category goes towards wages and benefits of 291 firefighters and officers. When you envision a fire department and a firefighter, you're probably thinking of the services that are included in this category. The next category up is fire prevention. This includes building inspections and compliance for fire code and fire investigations, and public education about fire prevention. The next service area we have included here is fire administration and other operations. This service area includes hazardous material response, fireboat response, and rescue operations, as well as dispatch operations. The next category is police patrol services. The patrol division is the core function of law enforcement within the community, and it's responsible for handling calls for service, conducting preliminary criminal investigations, responding to emergencies, and enforcing traffic laws and investigating car collisions. About 87% of the cost in this area goes towards wages and benefits of 200 police officers and sergeants. Police criminal investigations. This division provides for the administration and performance of investigations into assaults, homicides, domestic violence, vehicle burglaries, and other crimes. Spending here also includes forensic services, and about 80% of the costs here are staff. Police administration include police administration, special investigations, and other operations. This notably includes narcotics, gang prevention and intervention, the homeless outreach team or HOT team, school resource officers, animal control, dispatch, crime analysis, internal affairs, evidence management, and media and public relations. The criminal justice, jail prosecution, and public defense. Funding here is spent on our jail contract, which are costs that we incur when someone is arrested and booked into jail, as well as prosecution of crimes. The other expenses include expense for the municipal court. Finally, in this category is code compliance, neighborhood enhancement, gang prevention, and encampment administration. This category funds programs for nuisance building inspection and abatement, blight reduction, graffiti removal, gang prevention, and homeless encampment administration. These programs ensure safety in housing, buildings, and more broadly in our community. So obviously, there's a lot in this category. It's a big priority area for the city, but I'll give you a few moments to fill this out, and I'll ask Katie again if there's anything that has come through the chat.
I think people are very involved in filling out this section. I don't have any open questions right now. I think I'll give a moment to let people kind of think about this area a little bit. This does tend to be one of the areas that we get quite a few questions about, and I think that you see a lot more services here than typically we're able to share with the community about where we spend funding to support community safety.
And Katie, while folks are hitting that submit button, I'll answer a few of the questions that I saw come in previously around housing and economic development. So in the same vein of anti-racist actions, I saw a question about whether some of the economic development programs would focus on Black, Indigenous, and other people of color owned businesses. And the answer to that is absolutely. A lot of the programs that we have right now, both sustained programs, but also direct COVID response programs, are being, we are making sure that those businesses in particular are being communicated with, are being supported, and have access to the resources that they need. The other question that I saw that I wanted to answer was around housing, and it asked what housing programs would most impact or most help people that are being evicted as a result of COVID. We have several programs that are specifically aimed at those people that are not represented in the general fund budget that we have other funding sources for. But all of the affordable housing work that we do, especially the landlord-tenant program that you saw as a call-out line item, is intended to make sure that tenants are protected to the fullest ability that we have as a city, while also making sure that landlords are able to maintain properties and maintain, the units that we need to get everybody housed. And then the last thing I'll say is people are finishing to submit, because I see that we do have more submissions in this area than we have for any others, is that somebody asked, what are some examples of specific anti-racist policies as a response to what we're talking about? And I'll just, in the housing area, I'll point people to residential redlining as just an egregious example, which if you type in residential redlining Tacoma into your search engine, you'll see a map from 1937 that literally mapped out which neighborhoods in Tacoma people could and couldn't live in based on their race and what investment grades those neighborhoods were given as a result of who lived there. That has to be taken into account as we think about our housing policies. So if anybody wants to contact me offline, we can go deeper there. Katie, I see you have something before we jump into the results.
So I just wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to answer a couple of questions that I did see come in. So one note that if you are specifically in your tool making reductions in a certain area because you want to fund a different area, there is a comment function. Please submit comments along with your reductions. That's a really helpful guide for us to understand why you're reducing an area or increasing it, and kind of understanding your intent. So that extra information is really important to us. And then Jacques, I just wanted to take a moment to also recognize when we talk about resources available to our community right now, we are spending some of the city's funding on the rental assistance fund and rental assistance program right now. So if anyone has questions about that, you can look up rental assistance on the city's website. That is a place where we've both taken a very hard look at anti-racism and approaches to including equity and how we provide those resources, but that is also quite responsive to the current situation facing many renters in our community.
Great call out, Katie. Yeah, and people can find more info about the rental assistance program and the application on our website, like Katie mentioned. All right, so let's jump into the results in this section, and starting with fire suppression and readiness, it looks like we have a proposed reduction there of just under 5%. And for fire prevention, similarly, we have a very small reduction of $4,000. So in general, fire prevention was balanced out. For fire administration and other operations, it looks like we have, again, about a 5% proposed cut in that area. And then we get to police patrol services, where the story looks to be a little bit different, and we see that 49 of the 52 people that submitted an average cut in this area of more than 50%. So this seems to be an area that folks thought we could definitely see some savings on. Similarly, police criminal investigations tells a similar story, where most of the submissions look to have created cuts that approach 40% in that area. And then going into police administration, special investigations, and other operations, it looks like this was another area that was proposed to be cut by more than 50%. And finally, criminal justice, which includes jail, prosecution, public defense, and courts, had a proposed decrease of about 33% in that area. And I'm sorry, we have one more area, code compliance, neighborhood enhancement, gang prevention, and encampment administration. And similarly, we saw most of the submissions propose a reduction in this area of around 40% again. So Reed, that in the community survey as well?
Yeah, a little different, but overall, broad brushstrokes the same. This is an area, obviously, with a lot of funding, and so it's an area that people see as opportunities to perhaps decrease funding in order to balance the budget. Overall, the average submission has decreased this overall category by about 21%, with the major reductions coming in police patrol services, police administration, and special investigations, and finally in criminal justice, the jail, prosecution, public defense. So the quantities are a little bit different, but overall, it's an area that, from the responses that we've received, this has not been an area that people have, on average, submitted increased resources. So I'll move on to health and social services. This priority area is focused on improving and protecting environmental health and natural resources, improving access to healthy and affordable food, addressing racial and other health inequities, and improving equitable access to health services. The first category up here, subcategory, is homeless services and the stability site. these funds directly, This funds direct interventions into unsheltered individuals and families to address barriers to safe housing options and temporary emergency sheltering. Funding goes towards the Stability Site, which has 58 units and can house up to 80 individuals. Service providers throughout our shelter system engage with individuals experiencing homeless to offer connection to resources aimed at maintaining physical and mental well-being. And then there's another other category here. Spending here covers a lot of territory, including operations of senior centers, contracted services for youth violence reduction programs, domestic violence services, and administration of the neighborhood and community services department. I again will give people a couple minutes to fill this out. I could ask again, Katie, if there's anything, but if not.
So one note that I wanted to point out about the kind of, one of the aspects of this tool that we really like is the fact that we can finally talk about some of our services in terms of how they advance some of the council priorities rather than grouping them into departments or other types of functions. Under community safety, I just want to let you know that you did see services that are not just police and fire services. There were services there associated with departments like neighborhood and community services in the city. But I also want to note that we understand that this is a pretty, I don't want to say crude, but rough grouping of our services. So one thing that we've worked really hard to do is actually during our budgeting process, we've evaluated each of these services against how they actually support all of the council's priorities. So one of the things that I heard is for many of you, services around walkability or services around housing, that in many ways those impact your ability to feel safe in your community. And I would say we hear that. And that I will admit that the way that we've grouped things here is kind of a rough grouping, and something that we're trying to bring is a little bit more complexity when we bring forward information this fall about some of the co-benefits of programs and how they really do advance perceptions of safety in our community beyond what you'll see here today. So thank you so much for that feedback, and that's something that we'll continuously try to improve. And I also see a lot of comments around technical issues or things that we could do better next time with our tool. Thank you so much for that feedback. We'll continue to take that into consideration. This is our first year using this product, so thank you.
Katie, I wanted to say something about that. You're right about the groupings, and the things that make people feel safe or unsafe vary person by person. We have a number of surveys that you mentioned earlier that are out there where we ask more open-ended questions around, what are the things that you want to see in your community to make you feel safe? What are the things that make you feel unsafe in the community? And I've been going through some of those answers, and a lot of the time they are things that aren't really traditional, like what we would label public safety services. They're things like, I want better lighting on my street. I want, a sidewalk and crosswalks, some of those things that are more, we would probably categorize them as infrastructure, but they also contribute to the sense of safety throughout the community. So those are good places to go if you want to provide some of that input as well.
I really appreciate that. I also want to note that I saw a couple of comments about the fire department, and one of the things that I just want to emphasize is our fire department does provide fire response services and also emergency medical services that definitely support health and health efforts in our community, but they're really kind of responsive rather than proactive. But we have several proactive community health programs actually in our fire department. So just acknowledging that as well.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, we know that a healthy community has to have adequate housing, right? So there's so much crossover between a lot of these priorities because they are complex and interrelated, but we are at least taking a step at trying to look at the outcome as a community as opposed to just what each individual program is doing. But like Reed said, we do have these open-ended surveys. So I saw some comments around, how do we talk about things that don't exist yet? If we want to redirect funding from, let's say, police to a department that doesn't exist yet, we can't do that in this tool. And that's true. This tool isn't built for that necessarily. You can leave a comment like Reed showed around a particular area, but the surveys that Reed was pointing you to are also an opportunity to talk a little bit more broadly about how you would reimagine things or transform things. So Reed, Katie, if you're okay with it, I'll just jump into the results right now for this section. And it looks like we have a large increase proposed for homeless services in the stability site. It looks like a 200% increase proposed there. And then going, Reed, is there one that's above homeless services?
Nope.
No.
Just the two categories.
And then in the other category, we again see a large increase of about, what is that, 85% now. So overall, this is again an area that it looks like that you all on the call are saying we actually need to invest more in the health and social services of our community.
And that is what we have seen from the surveys that have been filled out previously. On average, people are expanding service in this category by about 40%. So.
Cool. So then that takes us to our final category, I believe, which is community.
Yeah.
engagement.
So this is the final category that you can really manipulate the spending on. So community engagement, this priority is focused to improving residents' understanding and ability to access government processes and services. Efforts striving to simplify initiatives that engage community and eliminate barriers to participating in public meetings. The first category up, subcategory here are communities, commissions, and neighborhood councils. Spending here includes the Human Rights Commission, advisory commission support, and the neighborhood council program. It also includes the innovative grant program. The council contingency area. The council contingency are funds that are used at the discretion of the city council and the mayor for programs that are not otherwise funded. The city council must approve specific expenditures in this area. And these are things that sometimes fall in between the cracks, or something might emerge in the community that we haven't built out in our budget. And sometimes the city council will find a need and something that they spend these dollars on. And then the other category, in this instance, includes items like the T-Town event, which is an exposition of city services that the city hosts every other year to kind of show what city services are offered. It also includes department-specific community engagement programs. So that wraps up this category. I will just say real quickly that the next section here of non-discretionary spending is not actually an area that you can adjust spending. Spending in non-discretionary includes things like debt service and pension payments that represent expenses that the city are required to fund. So. Any questions, Katie? Anything that's come up?
No, do you want me to head over into the revenue section?
Sure, you do that.
So, so before I start with revenues, I was going to make one kind of final comment. I saw a question around this fact that Jacques, Reed, and I were using language around perceptions of safety, and so one of the reference points that we have that we're using when we use that language is our community survey. So we do a survey of community residents, over 700, that's statistically significant and really represents all individuals in our community. So it represents our community completely when we do this, especially by racial, income, and age breakouts. And so one thing that I will note when we talk about perception of safety is we do look about disparate responses. So in our last community survey completed in January of this year, 82% of white residents indicated that they felt overall very safe or somewhat safe. But we saw lower responses for our Black and Hispanic residents in the low 70s. And so I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that as we talk about how we are looking at perceptions of safety, and then also why we want to understand more from our community about what it means to feel safe through those surveys that Jacques and Reed also mentioned. So going over into our tax areas, I just wanted to give a quick overview of the revenue options that you'll see in front of you. So we've tried to keep this very pretty simple. And so what you'll notice is that we show primarily increases in revenue. Some of these categories, we do have the ability to decrease the revenues, but given the budget situation that we're facing, we primarily left it on the increase side. If there are areas that you want to see decrease, please provide that feedback to us and comments. We know that expenses are one way of balancing the budget, and reviewing revenues are another, and looking at where we collect tax revenues. We do have the ability to raise some of our revenues through a city council vote, and other revenues through a vote of the people. I do want to acknowledge that some of these sources would, of course, be impactful on our community, either from a regressive standpoint, impacting lower income residents more than higher income residents, and that the timing of the taxes could be impactful on our economy when we are trying to increase spending and economic generation and address unemployment in our community and increasing taxes at the same time. But we wanted to at least put out there the options that are available to our community as you look at balancing our budget. So starting with property taxes, the option that you'll see here is a levy lid lift. So it's a property tax that we can impose for a limited amount of time. It typically is used for a specific service area. So if you increase this area, I would make a comment about what you would like to see that increase for. An example of us using a levy lid lift was actually increasing the levy to support the streets initiative in 2015. In terms of sales tax, you'll see that we do not have the ability to increase our general sales tax at this time. Business taxes, we currently do have the option to increase through through councilmanic authorities, or our city council could increase the business and occupation tax. And they could also eliminate our kind of gross income threshold, which is the threshold at which businesses have to earn a certain amount, then pay B&O taxes. And the B&O and occupation tax is actually applied to the general revenues that a business generates. Our utility taxes, this tax represents a tax that are actually charged to both public and our public and private utilities that operate in the city of Tacoma, and it's taxed on their revenues. The next category is other revenues. You'll notice that the majority of these cannot be adjusted. Some of these could theoretically be tweaked, but ultimately they would raise quite a little in revenues. The one category where we could potentially increase revenues is in our business license fees that we actually charge for businesses to operate in the city of Tacoma. And then finally, funding for affordable housing. I mentioned earlier that the city does have the authority to implement a dedicated tax for affordable housing. We can do that in a couple of different ways. One is through a sales tax. The other is a property tax. The sales tax can be actually implemented by a vote of our city council, while the property tax would need to go to a public vote. And technically, we could do both taxes as well. So that is just a quick overview of revenue options. Reed or Jacques, not sure if you're seeing any questions. I'm looking at questions right now.
I'm not seeing any questions for this section, but I am seeing that a lot of people did submit their proposals for revenue. So Reed, would you mind going back down so that we could just briefly go over what people submitted? Sure. So not a lot of submissions in the property tax, but of those that did, we did see an increase in the levy lid. The property tax question, did not see an increase, so unchanged by most of the users. Sales tax, similarly, no increase. Business tax, we saw a slight increase of 5% from today's proposals. For the utility tax, it looks like about a 1% increase there. And then for our other revenues, we see that there was not a lot of movement, a little bit of movement at licenses and permits. But going down, it looks like the affordable housing area was the one that we saw the most action around. Mm-hmm. So jumping down there, it looks like we had more than 25 people submit something here. And of those 25, it looks like all but 2 wanted some sort of additional funding for affordable housing, either through sales, property tax, or a combination of the 2. With a sales tax only option getting the least support of those options. Anything to add there, Katie? Okay, so Reed, I did see a question from somebody saying that they would like to, before we sign off, to quickly go through the categories one more time, since they've now had a chance to go through each of them. Would you mind going back up to access, and we'll quickly just go back down?
Yeah.
So I won't go through each of these areas, but I will just say, as Reed is scrolling through, that overall access to services and facilities was an area that it looks like people did want to see a little bit more of an investment into, which is a similar story for housing. And I think housing was the area that people wanted specifically to see the details for. So going to that top area, it looks like the affordable housing programs that the city runs were an area that people wanted to see a lot more investment into. And then for dedicated taxes, again, this was an area where it looks like the people on this call want to see some sort of tax increase to be able to support more affordable housing in our community. Homeless housing services is an area where we see a 500% increase proposal for today's call. And the multifamily property tax exemption saw a slight increase. And then the landlord tenant program was another one where we saw more than 200% increase. So, or I guess that's a 100% increase. That always confuses me, that statistic. Anyway, human rights support was another one that we saw a big increase from the proposals today. So overall, just to summarize, housing was an area that participants today said that we needed to significantly increase our city's investments towards. Similarly, we see that for business services, a 50% increase. For tax and licensing, a very slight increase, but an increase. So this was not an area that very many people felt like we needed to cut significantly. And then community safety, again, this was the area that we saw the most significant cuts. Some to fire in the range of 5% for the fire suppression, a slight increase to fire prevention efforts, a 5% decrease to fire administration. And then our most significant cuts came in the police patrol services, police criminal investigations, as well as police administration, special investigations, and other operations, and finally criminal justice. And then in the area of code compliance, neighborhood enhancement, and gang prevention, we saw about a 40% decrease proposed there. So health and social services, significant increases in proposed funding for both homeless services and the stability site, as well as other health and social service investments. And finally, in community engagement, we saw, again, increased investments into both the committees, commissions, and neighborhood councils, as well as the council contingency funds. And then an increase for other community engagement efforts. And I saw comments from folks about what your interpretation of other in community engagement meant, and all of those comments are very well received. So thank you for submitting those. Katie, Reed, were there any other call outs or themes that you wanted to to bring attention to?
I don't think so. I mean, I would just overall, from the people on this call, we not only cut $67 million out of the budget, but we ended up with a surplus. I think, that's good to know, and I would encourage people to provide comments, because it's not likely that the city would end up with a $30 million surplus and not offer additional services. So if there's other services that people on this call, or if you fill this out later, other services you want the city to provide that aren't currently represented in this tool, please make a comment and let us know. That's valuable information for us.
So thank you, Reed and Jacques. I'm just going to take a moment to wrap up for this evening. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. I hope that you felt like it was a productive use of your time and that you're more familiar with the services the state offers. I can say that we really appreciated that you dedicated your evening to providing us with this feedback on the city's general fund budget. We'll be sharing what we heard from you tonight with the City Council at the August 18th study session. At that study session, we'll be providing feedback and information on both the surveys that we've provided, as well as the Balancing Act tools. There's still time to provide feedback. We'll have all of those sites active until the end of the month, so that you can still provide us feedback. The city manager has been able to listen to tonight's activity, and we'll also be sharing all of the results with her. And I want to just let everyone know that if you'd like more information or want to stay updated on the City of Tacoma, the budget process, you can use the city's website. So for budget development, that's cityoftacoma.org/budget development. Elizabeth, would you like to say anything before we close out?
Just again, thank you everybody for participating and for your great feedback. It's helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you all, and have a good evening.